Go.
Hello, this is A Visit by Emerald Flight. A pair of lavender eyes opened slowly to the darkness. Like every night for the past 3 weeks, she'd awoke from a dreamless sleep early. She was still angry at herself, not that she knew why. Maybe it's because she was still blaming herself. Maybe it's because she didn't allow herself any emotion during the wake. Maybe it's because she hadn't spoken to nearly any pony since it had happened. She blinked, shadows overtaking shadows and forming a lightless pool of black in front of her. It was early, she was tired, and she was analyzing herself. Again.
Stupid brain, just shut up.
The moonlight streaming through the window revealed the way she'd been living recently. Books, mostly copying and self-help, were thrown carelessly, spines broken and pages bent, in the corners of the room. Beyond that, a dim bluish glow cast a light on everything from the pace-worn, tattered astrology carpet to the dust floating about in the air. She sighed, wincing as she heard her voice crack. She could feel the tears already pooling behind her eyes. She shook her head, levitating her pillow over to herself and pressing it against her face. She swore to herself to follow the wheel. She swore to herself. It'd been long enough since the accident. 3 weeks. That was long enough to stop the tears, at least. A sudden, frightening warmth ran through Twilight's body. Softer than a hot flash, but it had an edge of ice. Twilight's heart skipped 2 beats.
Where did the darkness go?
Her breathing became shallow. The room was filled with a dull glow, and a quiet buzzing bouncing around her brain, and it seemed to be emitting from right behind her. She shuddered as another flash of warmth ran through her body. Her eyes shifted around the now illuminated room. She could sense some pony or something else in the room with her. Another short breath. Against all better judgment, she shifted her body to her left. Emotions violently clashed in her mind. Very violently, fright and worry and confusion and the peaceful sense of familiarity were in the metaphorical battle. The only thing she could do was... Her thoughts were interrupted by a slightly translucent pink hoof pressing quite quickly against her lips, buzzing faintly as it did so.
Don't scream.
It must have been minutes, but it felt like hours. Then again, every minute in such a terrifyingly odd situation could make any average mare's heart burst. Twilight felt tears, frightened, surprised tears, surfacing again before her guest took its hoof off her lips.
Now, you're not gonna scream, right?
Twilight shook her head silently, her pupils pinpricked by this point. Her mind had calmed down just enough for her to get one sentence, though, across.
How?
The entity giggled. Her voice sounded detached, distant.
That's not the point, Twily.
A forced chuckle escaped Twilight's lips. Her nickname, it coming from the unearthly being before her, though, made her feel all kinds of burning emotions. She reached a shaky hoof up to her visitor's cheek. It felt normal, but there was an electric quality to it, as though she comprised nothing but lightning.
You can't. It doesn't make any...
She trailed off into mutters, still badly shaken. Another giggle echoed around the room, and Twilight retracted her hoof quickly in surprise.
But I'm here. Well, kinda. Look, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Don't be scared, Twily. Just be...
The disembodied voice drowned out as another thought clicked in Twilight's mind.
Once in a lifetime.
Without realizing fully what she was doing, she leaned forward and embraced the half-visible pink mare, sobbing as she did so.
How? You... I don't. Why would you? How could you?
She stuttered, taking every bit of comfort she could in the slight warmth of the embrace. She heard the detached voice echo around the room.
Shh, shh. I know. I know.
It was comforting, in the strangest way.
But Pinky, how could you? Why did you leave me like this?
Twilight continued, her voice rising in volume.
You couldn't have died. You couldn't have.
She inhaled, shuddering.
I loved you.
I'm sorry.
Pinky's voice whispered.
If I had the choice, you know I'd spend my life here in Ponyville with you.
But you didn't have the choice.
Twilight shouted, pulling away and sitting up.
You didn't, and it was my fault.
Pinky gasped. There was a moment or two of near silence, save for the gasps and sobs and buzzing echo around the room.
No,
She said firmly after a few moments.
please don't blame yourself, Twily. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't any pony's.
It was mine. It was my fault.
Twilight shouted again, tears streaming down her face.
I was right there. I was in the next room.
She choked on her words, her shouts breaking down into whispers.
I remember everything, Pinky. I remember the blood.
Images threw into her mind momentarily, images she'd never wanted to see again.
I could have stopped it. I could have...
She finished, leaning again into a deep hug. The sadness in her slowly began to lose its intensity as she felt such a familiar mare between her forelegs once again. By then, her cheeks displayed her grief, not anymore though. Every sob that now racked her body was emotionless. Just the feeling of being close to Pinky. The Pinky that she knew was gone, made her head light and her heart ache.
I remember it too.
Pinky's voice whispered. Twilight could feel the warmth of her breath in her ear.
I remember right after it happened, Twi.
A sniffle.
I could see you. You were crying, I think. Shouting something.
She grasped Twilight tighter as she heard a staccato breath.
I didn't want that, Twi. Neither did you. It was just a normal kitchen accident. It could have happened to any pony.
But it happened to you.
Twilight whispered back, and the sadness returned, full force. A fresh wave of tears came to her. She reminded crying into the entity's shoulder for, well, hours. No matter how long it was, though, it would never be long enough. The moon vanished slowly from the sight as a new brightness turned the black sky blue. Twilight had drifted in and out of sleep, taken into a state of total peace by her visitor. Her eyes snapped open as she felt day returning. She pulled away from the sleepy embrace.
Pinky?
She whispered, staring into the light blue eyes she knew too well.
Does this mean you're staying here?
She spoke with hope, even though she could feel the answer already. It was too long of a stretch. Pinky smiled, sadly, her body shifting colours momentarily in a haze of static.
I wish I could.
Twilight sniffed and nodded, quickly.
I guess so. I don't want you to go.
Her voice broke, but she steeled herself and continued.
I don't want you to leave again. I want you to stay with me. Please.
She took a shuddering breath, a few tears falling down her cheeks.
I love you.
Pinky raised a hoof to Twilight's face and gently wiped away her tears.
I'm sorry, Twi, but I can't. It's just not possible.
She whispered, her own staticky eyes visibly tearing up. Pinky moved her head forward slowly, catching Twilight in a soft kiss. Twilight's heart was on fire. Her horn began to glow light pink, and as a tingle ran up her spine.
Why can't this go on forever?
Of course it couldn't. Pinkie pulled away with a quiet buzz, her eyes still half closed. She brushed a few loose strands of hair out of Twilight's face with a slow, dimming hoof.
I want you to look in the second drawer of the chest next to my bed.
She nuzzled her cheek.
And I love you too, Twilight.
Twilight looked on helplessly, as every core of the pink mare's body, already having a seamlessly loose grasp in reality, dissolved as though blown away by the wind. She made a hopeless grab for the pink wisps sweeping away from her, before bringing her hoof back to her mouth in an attempt to comfort herself. The sun finally rose, less than 10 minutes later. But by that time, the library was missing its librarian. It was probably only luck that Applejack's harvest had taken her to the gates of the acres at a certain time earlier that morning. A minute less or a minute more, she would have had the chance to see her friend galloping through the adjacent street, a small object held close to her chest in a warm pink glow. Applejack's eyes followed Twilight down the street as a flurry of tired thoughts swarmed through her mind. Twilight seemed awfully upset, galloping at that pace, and so early in the morning. Too well, she's been upset since the incident. We all have. She looked hazily down the street. Now where could she be heading at this hour? All that's down there past the sea limits is the lake and the cliff sides. Applejack gasped, assuming the worst. Her pulse jumped and all thoughts of sleep were driven violently out of her mind as she abandoned her apple cart, leapt over the fence and took after her quickly retreating purple mare. As the quiet street filled with the sound of hoof on cobblestone, Applejack quickly went over everything in the end. Of the course, she was being drastic. Of course, there was another reason Twilight would be heading out of the town so early in the morning, but none came to mind, and therefore she couldn't afford to take the chances. Applejack may have been faster physically, but apparently Twilight was fueled by something beyond sugar and proteins. Applejack had just passed the city limits, panting and sweating, when she heard another pony's panting. They were still a good 2 miles from the cliffs. If that was Twilight, what had she stopped for? Applejack looked quickly around as the lightly frosted surroundings. She could see various buildings from Ponyville behind her, but everything else was only particularly familiar. There was a sound of a nearby stream, and, of course, a panting of an absent friend. She took a few cautious steps through the brush, before realizing the terrible pang of compassion what exactly Twilight had left Ponyville for. Though a lattice work of shadows, Applejack could see her friend standing in the small corner of the Oakfield Memorial Graveyard. She stood by, a hoof to her mouth, at the scene unfold in front of her. Twilight's heart was burning. She wasn't sure what it was, whether it was from her extraordinarily long gallop, or just a sleepless emotion-filled night. It didn't matter. She looked down at the granite headstone, a scowl on her face.
Keep calm and cupcakes.
The epitaph read.
Pinkamena Diane Pie. 6029, 654 CR. A bestest friend to you all. You even had to keep these things lighthearted in death, didn't you?
Twilight thought bitterly.
It's almost cruel.
She looked down at the ground below her. Plastered with wilted petals and rotting gifts of the entire population of Ponyville, she inhaled deeply and let out an angry sigh.
Twilight. I knew it was you, Pinky.
She began lowly.
It was you last night. I wasn't dreaming. I remember the warmth and feeling of somebody else in the room with me, and the buzzing. I know it was you.
Her voice was beginning to rise.
You've broken physics before, Pinky.
She shouted, biting her lip to calm herself down.
And you did it again. I know you did.
She finished, throwing a small wooden box onto the ground in front of the headstone. It snapped open, sending a small golden necklace flying towards the headstone. Silence.
This means forever.
Twilight nearly whispered, her voice shaking. Her eyes hadn't strayed from the ground below.
But it wasn't forever.
She put her hoof against her head.
This is stupid. It could have been forever. But I ruined it. I could have stopped it. I could have heard it and came in and stopped it from falling. It would have been... It wouldn't have been hard. I've picked up heavier things. I didn't need to happen to you. It could have happened when no pony was anywhere near it. But it did.
She fell to her haunches, her voice breaking, and then silence.
We could have had a life together, you and I.
Twilight sniffled, smiling despite herself.
A house to ourselves. A family. We could have grown old together. Lived our lives. In love.
A sob.
But no. No. The universe played a terrible joke on me. It took you away.
Tears rolled down her cheek freely, even though a thin smile was still playing on her lips.
Broken physics before, Pinky. Why won't you do it again?
She leaned forward and hugged the headstone, leaning on it with the weight of her misery. Her sobs, some of the last she would give for her loved one, echoed around the light forest. It was probably about half an hour before her tears diminished, and she stood stiffly, collecting a small necklace and returning it to the box with her magic.
What do you want, Applejack?
Silence, and the shuffling of dry leaves and awkward movements. Applejack emerged from the copse of the trees behind Twilight.
I'm sorry, Twi. I didn't mean to enter. What I mean to say...
She paused. Twilight remained stoic, and turned around to leave, still not looking at the orange earth pony standing embarrassingly near her. However, to Twilight's surprise, Applejack didn't stay behind or move ahead. She ended up walking alongside her, silently. Twilight was touched, but also felt a degree of frustration towards her friend. Couldn't she see Twilight wanted to be alone? To Twilight's further surprise, Applejack was still walking alongside her as they paused at the gates to Sweet Apple Acres. Twilight stopped, the box still held to her chest.
Applejack, go home.
Not until I know my best friend's okay.
She replied quietly.
I'm fine, AJ, just go.
Twilight said, with an undertone of exhaustion. She was more than ready for this emotional awkwardness to be over. Without further warning, Applejack leaned over and threw her foreleg around Twilight, enveloping her in a true embrace. Twilight was shocked at first. She had been so desperate to leave her friend, at least for the time being. She thought being alone could help her, but she felt herself leaning into it, to her dismay. Just the emotion in this one hug was too much, coming from some pony she knew cared about her. Just the compassion she felt in Applejack. too much. She felt that familiar tingle behind her eyes, and a signal went off in her brain.
No, not now, not in front of somebody else. Remember Pinky's will. Don't be sad. Be happy. Be happy.
I'm sorry, Twi.
Applejack whispered. That pushed her over the edge. Tears began to fall down her cheeks. But she didn't feel the kind of terrible misery she felt when she went over the accident in her mind, or the longing tears she felt when she was with Pinky's spirit, or whatever her visitor may have been the night before. She smiled and reached her foreleg back around Applejack, returning the hug.
Thank you, AJ. Thank you so much.
Not all tears have to be sad.